Have you ever wanted to play a game that perfectly captures the pain and agony that goes into building a civilization while your opponent and the game itself seek to torture and destroy you? Well, now you can with Nova Era. Nova Era is a card tableau builder that plays 2 to 4 players in roughly an hour. Players guide their civilization from simple beginnings to vast scientific empires, doing their best to navigate the never-ending downpour of terrible crap the game throws at you, scratching and clawing at small amounts of resources and victory points, while your perfect little engine you've constructed gets smashed to pieces or made completely redundant with each new upcoming technology. Your opponent hates you, the game itself hates you, and by the end of it, you'll hate yourself for not drafting that one card 2 rounds ago that would have given you 2 points to win the game. Nova Era is a fairly unique game in how beautifully punishing and mean it can be. Every round you'll be drafting from a pool of dice, okay? Leaving 1 dice pool left over. Whatever color the pips are on those leftover dice, you'll reduce the disaster markers of their respective color by that much. So if we leave a black 5 behind, we get 5 steps closer to the Dark Ages. And what happens when those numbers reach 0? Well, they damage your cards by flipping them over and make you apply a minus to all the dice you selected for that round. I think part of the fun of the game is just experiencing this constant barrage of bad crap happening as a group and doing your best to tactically mitigate these awful disasters. The game essentially adopts an ethos of adapt or perish. The general thrust of the game is to highlight the enduring power of civilizations and their ability to continuously rise from the ashes. Nothing in this game is supposed to be permanent. This is not an engine builder. You will not be rewarded with a never-ending cascade of victory points and resources. Every point in this game is scratched and clawed at. A card that gives you 2 victory points is a bloody treasure, coveted by every civilization sitting at the table. You need to do your absolute best to stay floating in this game and make sure that the technologies that you build don't end up quickly becoming rendered obsolete. Because just like our own technologies, some technologies in this game can become obsolete with the coming of a new age. As I said, you can never get attached to any of your cards. It's up to you to get the most of them as quickly as you can before either the game or your opponent destroys them. The dice drafting itself is pretty enjoyable because there are definite moments when you can sort of mitigate the disasters that may be coming your way. You know, like if I'm the last person drafting, I can sort of dictate which dice I want to leave over to screw out everybody else but myself. And there's a cool, interesting decision space to be in because oftentimes in games you just want to be first. But in this game, I think sometimes it's really nice to go last. But like the game taketh away, so too does the game giveth, because each new age can see some of your cards earning you new upgraded cards that you can build. So, you know, it's not all doom and gloom with the coming of new ages. And it's not as if the game leaves you in this pile of rubble that was once your cards with absolutely nothing to rebuild with, because you can spend 1 die to repair 2 cards. And given that at the end of every round, players score points for majorities in each of the 4 colors, this can be a huge swing if timed just right, and when you get that timing right, you end up taking the majority in 2 areas because your opponent wasn't expecting a repair. Well, when that happens, it feels pretty damn good. You feel pretty damn clever. But I think what keeps this game from being excellent is that I don't feel there's enough variability in the cards themselves, or more importantly, creativity. A lot of the cards are your typical resource gaining stuff with, you know, +1 to this or that. Rare are the cards that do really interesting things, like this card that allows you to draft a card above the available draft order. For a tableau builder, I want abilities that are interesting to have, and a lot of these abilities provided by these cards they're fairly mundane. You know, I still enjoy the entire process of sort of building up my civilization, but I can't help but feel there's a real lack of diversity that separates myself from my opponent sometimes. Perhaps this is something, you know, remedied with upcoming expansions. Like, you'll see similar cards in each age, you know, granting you a -1 to cost here, or a flip a die there, or this card counts as 2 of whatever color. Sometimes it can get a little repetitive. The coolest cards all seem to pop in age 3, but the problem is that by the time you obtain them, they may be relatively redundant, especially if they're further away in the draft order, which I kind of found a little disappointing. Like this card, okay, this card, which allows me to draft red cards for 2 less. Well, that's great and all, but if it's near the end of the game and it's further in the draft order, who the hell cares? And because the deck is just so large and you put out so few cards from each age, you can't really plan for any coherent long-term strategies. You know, like this nationalism card is strong as hell, but if I go into the start of the game crossing my fingers that it shows up as I stockpile cards into my past, I'll likely end up frustrated and when it just inevitably doesn't show up. But I did say at the beginning that this is a game largely of tactics and not necessarily long-term strategy. So I suppose, that's a minor quibble. I still enjoy the constant readjusting to my plans every single round, but I understand some of you may hate that. And if you are the type of person who likes to go into each game with an idea of the path you want to be following, this is a game you probably want to stay away from. I watched the Dice Tower review of this game recently, and one of the reviewers called the game mean. To her, that was slander, but to me, it was a call to get me to play it more. Yeah, the game is mean, and yet most of the meanness doesn't feel like it's targeting. Now, there are certainly a few cards that do target other civilizations, but they are few or far in between. But for the most part, everyone is sort of suffering together, It's like, it's all up to you to adapt and overcome. But you have to understand that the more you play, the more you're able to sort of navigate the meanness of the game. It's sort of like when you first start playing Agricola, and you're like, oh, I don't want to keep feeding my people. This is stupid. All I'm doing is feeding my people. But then after a certain amount of time, of playing the game, you begin to realize, oh, okay, this is something that I can mitigate. This is something that I actually have control over. Yeah, it's super restraining, but there's enjoyment and fun within that restrainment. And I do really love the leaders in this game. There are very few of them in this game because when you put out the cards for each given round, you're only putting out like a very small amount. So in a 2-player game, for example, and that's primarily what we played it at, you'll only see like 4 leaders for each given age. And I do think that this game is primarily a 2-player game. I think we've played it at more, but I think the board state gets so incredibly chaotic that it just becomes a tad overwhelming. I think with 2 players, it's much easier to mitigate all the disasters that can come your way, while at the same time sort of manipulating the board state and the dice pool to sort of like, well, I said I'm a mean player, to sort of like screw over your opponent without screwing over yourself. Whereas, in a 4-player game, the shit hits the wall and there's no planning at all. You're just literally just drafting crap, crossing your fingers, and you're hoping for the best. So if you do play this game, definitely just play the 2. I think this game deserves a solid 7. It's a good game, and I enjoy playing it, and I likely won't get rid of it. However, there are just a few issues I have with the overall experience that keeps it from being a really great game. This is one I could see rising with creative expansions in the future. At the very least, I recommend you all give it a try. Just remember to go into the experience expecting just a little bit of pain. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Goodbye.